The emergency lights flickered overhead as I crouched beside the main utility vault, the acrid scent of ozone lingering in the air. My heart was still hammering from the shock of the faulty line earlier, a near brush with electrocution that left my skin tingling and my mind alarmed. But the physical jolt was nothing compared to the clarity it brought. For years, I had been covering for Max, patching over the cracks in his judgment, justifying negligence for the sake of appearances. And just like the electrical systems I managed, our relationship had been running on faulty wiring. Max had told me he was meeting with investors in a neighboring state. A routine, business-as-usual trip. But instinct, that sharp edge honed by years of managing crises, told me something was off. It wasn't just the way he had avoided eye contact at breakfast. It was the energy in his messages, the carefully curated casualness that never truly sat right with me. Something about this venture smelled of secrecy, of unspoken motives. I moved carefully through the vault, the sound of my boots echoing against the metal walls. Every diagram, every schematics panel, was familiar to me, but I knew there were corners Max assumed I wouldn't explore, places his cousin Gabriella, who had more influence in corporate politics than anyone liked to admit, would never let me touch. But tonight I needed to look. I needed to understand. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath a folded diagram, shining faintly under the flickering light, was a single earring. Not just any earring, but one set with a dark amethyst stone, large and impossibly unique. My stomach dropped. I knew it instantly. Gabriella's signature jewelry, the piece Max had always mocked as ostentatious, the one he would roll his eyes at whenever she wore it to board meetings or family gatherings. My fingers hovered over the earring, incredulous. How had it ended up here, in this highly secure, sensitive company space? I examined it closely. The subtle inclusions in the stone, the meticulous setting, unmistakable. It wasn't a casual misplacement, it was evidence. The presence of this earring here was proof, silent but damning, of a connection that was both intimate and professional. Max's negligence had crossed a boundary I hadn't realized existed, mixing personal indulgence with corporate oversight, hiding it in plain sight, thinking I wouldn't notice. I slid the earring into my pocket and leaned against the vault wall, taking a deep breath. The shock from earlier still tingled in my veins, a reminder of my mortality, my responsibility, and the truth I could no longer ignore. I realized then that this was bigger than one errant accessory or one reckless misstep. It was a pattern of deliberate manipulation and cover-up, one that I could no longer let continue. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear because confronting Max and whoever else was involved would be dangerous. Exhilaration because I finally saw the path forward, the work that had to be done, the justice that could be served. I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I was awake. And so, holding the dark amethyst in my palm, I made a silent vow. No more excuses, no more patchwork, no more compromised integrity. It was time to face the truth and expose the corruption hidden behind the carefully maintained facade of family loyalty and corporate trust. I couldn't stop thinking about the amethyst earring. It was more than a beautiful stone. It was a sign, a breadcrumb leading me into a world Max had thought I'd never see. The thought that he had brought Gabriella, his cousin, his secret accomplice in ambition, into spaces I had considered untouchable made my chest tighten. It wasn't just betrayal, it was audacity, and it demanded a response. Later that evening, back in the quiet of my office, I powered up Max's work computer. I knew the password patterns, the names of family pets, birthdays, anniversaries, trivial security gestures that Max assumed were enough to keep his secrets safe. I hesitated only a moment before typing the combination that had worked too many times before. Access granted. The familiar desktop greeted me, sterile and professional, but I was hunting for something far more telling. There it was, a folder I had never noticed, cleverly hidden behind layers of project files. Its title was innocuous, but the encryption icon told a different story, sensitive, deliberate, secret. My pulse quickened as I opened it, revealing not spreadsheets or operational updates, but detailed plans for manipulating the grid itself. A single, chilling phrase leapt from the screen. Simulate critical system failure to secure infrastructure deal. I froze. The implications hit me immediately. Max wasn't just negligent, he was scheming, creating crises he could exploit for profit, using public trust as leverage. And Gabriella's involvement wasn't incidental. She had a vested interest in the outcome. Her signature jewelry in the vault was proof of her presence and participation. The earring had been misplaced, yes, but it confirmed what I had feared: intimacy mixed with business corruption. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the next file, a series of encrypted messages between Max and Gabriella, discussing timing, infrastructure weaknesses, and the profits to be reaped from regulatory complacency. Their conversation was casual, almost playful, but beneath it lay calculation and deliberate intent. They weren't just exploiting the system. They were exploiting me and everyone who trusted them. I leaned back in my chair, processing the scale of the betrayal. The near electrocution earlier in the day suddenly felt symbolic, a literal shock forcing me awake to the reality of Max's duplicity. All those nights spent covering for his mistakes, rationalizing his shortcuts, pretending everything was under control, had been a lie. He had been building a private, secret advantage while I managed the consequences. A mix of rage and clarity coursed through me. There would be no confrontation yet, no impulsive exposure. I needed precision, proof, and a partner I could trust to act strategically. My rebirth wasn't just about protecting myself emotionally. It was about integrity, about systems, about accountability. I carefully saved the messages, backed up the files, and encrypted the evidence. I knew who I needed to contact, someone with both the ethics and authority to act decisively. Someone who would recognize the magnitude of Max's scheme and the danger of letting it go unchecked. My mind immediately went to Sam Ryan, my brother's best friend and a former utility regulator. He had always been meticulous, ethical to a fault, and immune to the kinds of manipulation Max relied on. If anyone could dismantle this web of corruption safely and effectively, it would be him. As I closed the laptop, I felt the full weight of my decision. I was no longer complicit. I was awake, and I was ready to reclaim integrity, both in the system I managed and in my own life. The air in my office felt heavier than usual, thick with the anticipation of the steps I was about to take. The evidence on my laptop wasn't just damning, it was dangerous. Max and Gabriella had built their scheme carefully, hiding behind trust, family ties, and corporate credibility. One wrong move, and I could find myself facing repercussions I wasn't prepared for. But hesitation wasn't an option. Integrity demanded action. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Sam Ryan's contact. He had always been meticulous, ethical, and fearless when it came to exposing corruption. I had grown up hearing my brother talk about Sam's uncompromising stance during his days at the utility regulator. He didn't play favorites, he didn't bend under pressure, and he had an innate understanding of infrastructure systems. If anyone could dismantle Max's carefully constructed web, it was Sam. My fingers hovered over the call button. I felt the familiar thrill of crossing into unknown territory, part fear, part empowerment. Then I pressed it. The line rang, each pulse echoing like a heartbeat. Naomi? Sam's voice was calm, steady, almost neutral. But there was an underlying sharpness, a readiness that immediately put me at ease. Yes, I said, taking a deep breath. I need your help. It's Max and Gabriella. They're planning a major system failure for profit. I have proof, documents, messages, everything. There was silence on the line for a brief moment, then Sam's tone sharpened. Show me everything, step by step. No detail omitted. I transferred the encrypted files, watching as the transfer bar inched forward. The evidence, once confined to my laptop, was now in the hands of someone with the authority and expertise to act. Sam reviewed it with a careful intensity that reminded me why he had earned his reputation. His questions weren't about trust, they were about understanding the full scope of the manipulation, the timing, the vulnerabilities. While he analyzed the files, I realized how much weight I had been carrying alone. Max had relied on my silence, my commitment to managing the crisis, and my respect for protocol to shield his misconduct. Gabriella had assumed her involvement would remain hidden, her influence unchallenged. But I had removed their safety net. Sam confirmed what I feared. The planned system failure wasn't just a minor exploitation. It had the potential to compromise entire regions, endanger thousands, and funnel millions into private hands. And yet, with careful action, it could be stopped, and Max and Gabriella held accountable. By the end of the call, a plan was in motion. Sam would use his contacts within the regulatory framework to ensure the infrastructure deal collapsed before it even reached approval. The press would be informed strategically, exposing the personal and professional betrayal simultaneously. Max's rapid rise and Gabriella's influence would be scrutinized publicly, leaving no room for manipulation. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a rush of clarity and purpose. The fear that had clung to me earlier, from the near electrocution to the discovery of the earring, had been transformed into focus. I wasn't just acting for myself anymore. I was protecting the system, the public, and the truth. And somewhere deep inside, I realized that this rebirth, this commitment to integrity and uncompromising action, was as much about reclaiming my own life as it was about stopping them. Even after the call with Sam, sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying the events of the past week in my mind, the near electrocution, the earring, the encrypted messages, and the realization that Max had been exploiting not just the system, but my trust. It was one thing to suspect negligence. It was another to see the deliberate intertwining of personal gain and professional corruption. My clarity, born from shock and fear, had transformed into resolve. I returned to the utility vault the next day, determined to see if there was more evidence I could gather. Max had been meticulous, but the earring had proven that even the most careful deception leaves a trace. I moved with purpose, retracing my steps, examining every diagram, cabinet, and overlooked nook. Every corner of the vault was a testament to my knowledge of the system, and that knowledge gave me an advantage. In a narrow, forgotten compartment, I found a small USB drive taped under a metal shelf. My pulse quickened as I slid it into my laptop. The files were labeled with innocuous names, but I recognized the coding pattern Max used for sensitive information. Opening them, I found detailed schedules, private communications, and a record of internal manipulations intended to create artificial system weaknesses. There were spreadsheets showing projected financial gains from the failure, timelines for equipment malfunctions, and even instructions for personnel to follow misleading protocols. My stomach churned. Max and Gabriella hadn't just planned a minor disruption. They had orchestrated a cascading failure designed to exploit both the public and the regulators. And the evidence was undeniable. The technical details were clear, precise, and damning. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. Finally, the truth was in my hands. As I compiled everything into an organized, secure package, I realized how much this mission had shifted my perspective. The near-death experience, the shock that had set this chain of clarity in motion, had given me the courage to see Max and Gabriella for who they truly were. It wasn't just betrayal, it was systemic corruption, hidden beneath charm and familial ties. I had been complicit by ignorance for too long, and that ended now. By evening, I had contacted Sam again. I transferred the USB files, ensuring every piece of proof, from the physical earring to the digital schematics, was in capable hands. He examined them with the same meticulous intensity as before, asking precise questions, confirming every detail. I realized, even in this moment of calculated exposure, how much I trusted him. Not just his expertise, but his integrity. When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. The rebirth that had begun with shock and fear had grown into purpose. I wasn't merely reacting to Max's schemes. I was shaping the outcome. I was reclaiming my professional authority, my moral clarity, and my autonomy. And in the quiet aftermath, as I reviewed the evidence one final time, I sensed the first flickers of something else, a connection with Sam beyond the professional. It was subtle, understated, and rooted in shared ethics and trust, but it stirred a warmth I hadn't anticipated. Amid the chaos of betrayal and exposure, it was a reminder that integrity attracts its counterpart, even in matters of the heart. The morning felt electric, though not because of faulty lines or sparking equipment. The tension in the city's energy sector had shifted. Max's planned infrastructure deal, once cloaked in secrecy and influence, was now under scrutiny. Sam had moved quickly, using his contacts and insider knowledge to ensure regulators received the evidence in a way that demanded action. The documents, the USB drive, the earring, each piece corroborated the others, forming a chain impossible to dispute. I watched the process unfold with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Every call Sam made, every carefully worded communication to the press, was calculated to reveal the truth without endangering innocent parties. The regulators, accustomed to layers of obfuscation, found themselves facing incontrovertible evidence. The planned failure could no longer be enacted. Max and Gabriella were cornered, their projected profits evaporating under the weight of transparency. The first public acknowledgement came as a terse press release. The regulatory body confirmed that an internal review had uncovered attempts to exploit a regional power system for private gain. Although names weren't immediately released, the implication was clear. Max's deal was no longer viable. Gabriella's influence, once untouchable, was suddenly subject to scrutiny and investigation. I felt a flicker of vindication, but tempered it with caution. Max was not a man to crumble quietly. I anticipated resistance, deflection, even manipulation. But Sam's presence beside me, both professionally and now personally, brought calm. He had guided me through every step with precision, answering questions I hadn't thought to ask, preempting challenges I hadn't anticipated. His steady confidence was contagious, grounding me amidst the storm. As the regulatory bodies moved publicly, Sam and I reviewed every detail again. The exposure was working, Max's network of influence unraveling like a faulty wire. And in the quiet moments between calls and emails, I found myself stealing glances at Sam, noticing the subtle shifts in his expressions, pride at the strategy's success, warmth at my insight, and a protective attentiveness I hadn't expected. Later, we met in person at a small, quiet cafe near the regulator's office. The world outside moved on, unaware of the silent battle waged in boardrooms and secure offices. Sam leaned back in his chair, his hand brushing mine across the table accidentally, yet intentionally. I didn't pull away. "Naomi," he said softly, "you did this. You saw through it. You acted." "I had help," I replied, though I knew it was more than that. Sam's guidance had been invaluable, but the courage, the clarity, the willingness to confront the betrayal that had been mine alone. He smiled, a small, private smile, and I felt the first true warmth of connection beyond strategy and crisis. It wasn't sudden, it was deliberate, the kind of intimacy that grows from shared purpose and mutual respect. The chaos of Max and Gabriella's schemes had created space for trust, and in that space, I realized the potential for something deeper. By evening, the deal was officially canceled, Max's corruption publicly noted, and Gabriella's influence questioned. Naomi, the utility manager, had reclaimed the integrity of the system, and Naomi, the woman, had glimpsed a future in which honesty, trust, and partnership were not just ideals, but lived realities. And somewhere in the quiet moments, I realized that Sam's hand in mine felt right. Protective, respectful, steady. A bond forged not in passion alone, but in shared courage and unwavering commitment to truth. After the regulatory takedown, the adrenaline that had fueled me for days began to ebb, leaving behind a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Max's schemes were unraveling, Gabriella's influence was being questioned, and the city's power systems were finally stabilizing. But what lingered with me, subtly yet insistently, was Sam. He had stayed by my side throughout the crisis, meticulously analyzing each document, advising every step, and ensuring the exposure of corruption was precise and unstoppable. But beyond the professional alliance, there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore, a quiet, steady connection that had grown through shared purpose and unwavering trust. One evening, After reviewing the final reports confirming Max's deal collapse, Sam suggested we walk along the waterfront. The city lights shimmered on the water's surface, soft reflections moving with the ripples. It was quiet, a contrast to the chaos of the past weeks. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time since discovering the amethyst earring. "Naomi," Sam said, his voice unusually gentle, "you handled everything flawlessly. I've seen many people face crises, but rarely someone with your clarity, courage, and composure. You didn't just react. You controlled the outcome." I smiled, a little self-conscious. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." He chuckled softly. "Maybe. But I think you already had everything it took. I just reminded you that it was yours to claim." There was a pause, a moment suspended between the factual and the personal. His eyes held a depth that went beyond gratitude or admiration, respect interlaced with warmth. Without thinking, I reached for his hand. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, a natural extension of the trust we had built. He took my hand easily, intertwining our fingers with a comfort that felt like home. The connection was subtle at first, a brush of warmth, a gentle pressure, but it carried an intimacy that had nothing to do with passion alone. It was the recognition of mutual respect, aligned purpose, and shared values. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe fully, to feel without calculating risk. We walked in silence, side by side, hands intertwined. Words felt unnecessary. Each step echoed the partnership that had formed in the fires of crisis, a bond forged in integrity and action. The city hummed around us, unaware that two people had reclaimed not only justice, but something far more personal, trust in each other, and the promise of something enduring. As we reached the edge of the pier, Sam stopped and looked at me, eyes soft yet intent. "Naomi, what we've built here, it's rare. I hope you know that." "I do," I replied, squeezing his hand. "And I want it. All of it." He smiled, the kind of smile that conveyed both relief and understanding. I realized then that the partnership I had feared might be purely professional had blossomed into something richer. Something honest, safe, and undeniably ours. The night air wrapped around us, cool but comforting. I felt the weight of the past lift slightly, replaced by the steady warmth of connection. With Sam, I was no longer just Naomi the manager, Naomi the problem solver. I was Naomi reborn, aware, empowered, and capable of trusting both my judgment and my heart. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long stripes across my desk as I reviewed the latest updates. Max's world was unraveling, piece by piece. Sam had worked methodically, ensuring the regulatory authorities, board members, and the press received all the proof we had gathered. It wasn't messy or impulsive. It was precise, irrefutable, and devastating in its impact. I watched the news feed anxiously. Headlines splashed across the screen. Regional power deal collapses amid corruption scandal. Utility executive under investigation for system manipulation. Family ties questioned as insider involvement revealed. Max's name was finally connected to the actions he had tried so hard to conceal. Gabriella's jewelry, the digital messages, the schematics, all pieces of a puzzle that left the public and regulators stunned. The fallout was more satisfying than I expected. Max's credibility, once carefully cultivated, lay in tatters. His investors distanced themselves immediately. Gabriella faced scrutiny she hadn't anticipated, and regulatory reviews were launched across multiple departments. The system I had sworn to protect was safe, and the corruption had been stripped away, layer by calculated layer. Amid the chaos, Sam was at my side, reviewing every public report, every statement, every press release. But unlike the boardroom tension and investigative scrutiny, there was a quiet, personal undercurrent between us. I noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, the slight brush of his hand against mine as we passed documents back and forth, the subtle smiles that conveyed more than words could. We left the office late that evening, the city alive with ordinary motion around us, while the consequences of the scandal played out in the headlines. Sam suggested walking through the park nearby. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves, and for the first time since the crisis began, I allowed myself to exhale fully. "You were incredible today," Sam said quietly, keeping pace with me. Not just with the evidence or the strategy, with everything. Calm, decisive, unshakable. "I've seen many leaders, but very few have your clarity under pressure." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. "I couldn't have done any of it without you," I admitted. "You guided every step, and you never doubted the evidence." He turned to look at me, eyes serious but tender. "I didn't doubt you. I've always known you could handle more than anyone realized. But Naomi, seeing you take control, exposing the truth, standing up for integrity, it's inspiring." Our hands brushed, then linked naturally, as if the weeks of trust, collaboration, and shared intensity had been leading to this moment. The connection wasn't just attraction, it was alignment, mutual respect, and recognition of shared values. I felt a thrill in that simplicity, a sense of belonging that went beyond the professional. By the time we returned to the city streets, Max's name was on every news ticker, his reputation irreparably tarnished. Gabriella's influence had been questioned, and the system was secure once more. And yet, the real victory for me wasn't just professional, it was personal. I had reclaimed my agency, protected what mattered, and discovered a partner who shared not just my mission, but my values and my heart. The crisis had forged something stronger than justice alone. It had forged trust, intimacy, and the beginnings of love. And standing beside Sam, hand in hand, I realized the fight had been worth every risk. The morning after the press conference that confirmed Max's corruption had been exposed, the city felt different. Not the city itself. It was the same skyline, the same hum of traffic, the same flicker of sunlight on glass. But I felt different. Reborn. The weeks of fear, shock, and meticulous strategy had transformed into something stronger: clarity, empowerment, and a sense of integrity restored. Max's schemes were fully unraveled. His investors had pulled out, Gabriella's influence was under investigation, and regulators had begun reviewing other projects linked to their network. The utility systems were secure, and the public trust, shaken but not broken, had a chance to be rebuilt. It was a victory not just of action, but of principle. And yet, my mind kept returning to Sam. Through it all, he had been steady, unwavering, and fiercely intelligent. He didn't just help expose Max. He matched my pace, challenged my ideas when necessary, and trusted me to lead where it mattered. The bond we had formed during the crisis had deepened into something subtle, intimate, and undeniable. That afternoon, we met at the quiet cafe we had discovered weeks ago, away from cameras, headlines, and the constant scrutiny of the professional world. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans, a comforting aroma that somehow grounded me. Sam reached across the table and took my hand in his. "You know," he said softly, "I've never worked with anyone like you. Your clarity, your courage, it's rare." I felt warmth spread through my chest. "And I've never trusted anyone like you," I replied honestly. "Not in the professional sense, and maybe not in any other sense either." He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that carried both affection and admiration. "We make a good team," he said. "Maybe the best one I've ever had." I nodded, squeezing his hand. But it wasn't just professional pride I felt. It was personal. There was a tenderness in our connection, a recognition that had grown naturally through shared purpose, danger, and integrity. It was steady, safe, and real, the opposite of Max's manipulations. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the cafe, Sam leaned closer. "Naomi, if we're being honest, I've wanted this, not just the partnership, but us for a while." I met his gaze, feeling a surge of warmth and certainty. "Me too," I admitted, my voice quiet but sure. "I think we've earned it." And then, in that simple, unhurried moment, we closed the distance between us. Not a dramatic declaration, not a sudden passion, but a kiss filled with trust, respect, and the quiet intensity of two people who had faced truth together and emerged stronger. When we pulled back, smiling at each other, I realized just how far I had come. From near electrocution and betrayal to exposing corruption and reclaiming integrity, I had been tested in every way. But the ultimate rebirth wasn't just professional or moral, it was personal. Hand in hand with Sam, I walked into a future that felt solid, honest, and fiercely alive. We were partners in every sense, protecting systems, seeking truth, and discovering love in the wake of chaos. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, unreservedly at peace. The city hummed around us, bright and indifferent to the dramas of the past weeks. But I knew one thing: integrity, courage, and the right partner could turn even the darkest chaos into a rebirth. And this was mine.